Welcome to today's session about cloud security controls, where we will take a look at a recent incident which happened at CodeSpaces and subsequent learning we take back from this incident. The cloud computing industry has come a long way in the past couple of years. In 2008, the cloud computing industry was at $46 billion. In 2014, it has reached $150 billion. That's a growth of over 300% in 6 short years. A sizable chunk of businesses today have already adopted the cloud services in order to fulfill one or more of their requirements, and this number is growing rapidly. By 2017, it is estimated that 91% of businesses would have migrated to the cloud. The main reason for this behavior is the flexibility that the cloud offers. In addition to this, there are 2 more factors which influence the decision to migrate to the cloud. The first one is reduction in costs that the cloud enables. The statistics displayed on the screen show that organizations are able to cut down 1/4 of their expenditure by migrating to the cloud. Half of the IT firms that shifted to cloud services said that they have reduced their IT expenses by up to 25%. Similarly, there is another factor which influences our decision, and that is security. Statistics show that the majority of users who opt for cloud services believe that it gives them more security. The cloud service provider also makes it easy for them to meet compliance requirements. Both of these factors clubbed together make the cloud a very lucrative option. It's a place where you can save cost as well as ensure security for your assets. However, things don't always go as expected, and a case in point is the incident which happened recently with CodeSpaces in June earlier this year. CodeSpaces was a cloud-based code hosting service, which means that they use the cloud to store all their business-critical data. This incident started off as a DDoS attack, which was apparently something that happened fairly often, but soon escalated and stretched up to a period of 12 hours, resulting in CodeSpaces having to lose most of their customers' data. This loss of data, the cost of resolving the issue, and more importantly, loss of credibility, has forced CodeSpaces to shut their business, and they are currently trying to help customers regain whatever data is possible. So CodeSpaces faced the cloud's worst nightmare. They had to shut down their business because of an incident which occurred. This incident serves as a wake-up call for all organizations depending on the cloud for hosting their services, and raises questions regarding the general consensus about security in the cloud. So what about all those statistics that we saw a while ago? Why do people feel that the cloud is more secure? Is it just their gut feeling, or is it misplaced trust in the provider? Or was this just a case of some isolated incident which is not really going to affect others? To find the answer to these questions, let us take a better look at the incident itself. It all started with DDoS attacks against the CodeSpaces server. The CodeSpaces team is used to be on the receiving end of such attacks, and were dealing with the attack in their regular manner. In the meanwhile, the attacker left multiple messages for the CodeSpaces team on their Amazon EC2 console, asking them to contact an undisclosed Hotmail address. When CodeSpaces initiated contact with the attackers, it turned out that the motive was extortion. The attackers demanded a large undisclosed sum of money in return for resolving the DDoS. This seems to be a recurring trend in the cloud industry these days. Evernote and Feedly, two were the victim of DDoS attacks where extortion was the primary motive. During this time, the CodeSpaces team realized that someone had gained unauthorized access to their Amazon console. This was most probably based on the fact that the messages had been left for them on their own Amazon console. They attempted to gain back control by changing their password. However, this unfortunately turned out to be counterproductive and ended up alerting the attacker instead. The attacker had already created multiple backup credentials, and the recovery attempt by CodeSpaces prompted the attacker to take action. The attacker, on realizing that he was not going to get the ransom money and CodeSpaces was attempting recovery of their console, started deleting the virtual images and backups via the console. By the time CodeSpaces gained back complete control of their console, the damage was already done. The attacker had deleted most of the content, forcing CodeSpaces to close down. Now that we have taken a look at the incident itself, I would like to go back to our original question. Is this the case of an isolated incident? It doesn't really seem like that. Based on the statements and claims which have been made by CodeSpaces, we can see that they had indeed made an effort to safeguard their data. They also had a backup and recovery plan in place. They claimed that they backed up everything in real time. As soon as you make a change to your data, they were backing it up. With all these precautions, what did go wrong? Although conclusive statements cannot be made as complete details of the attack are yet to be revealed, we can draw some conclusions based on the details which have been disclosed so far. The attacker had compromised the Amazon console credentials. However, it does not seem that the attacker was able to achieve this by exploiting some vulnerability on Amazon. Also, CodeSpaces claims that no data was compromised. Therefore, we can surmise that the attacker did not compromise any of the images owned by CodeSpaces or exploit a vulnerability within one of the VMs to carry out the attack. The attacker was able to delete all the data as well as the backups via the console itself. This highlights the flaw in the backup plan by CodeSpaces. First of all their assets were mapped to the same console. That is, there was no distribution of assets across multiple locations. Secondly, even the backups were apparently in the same cloud. This kind of beats the whole purpose of having a backup in the first place. So what could have been done differently to prevent such an attack? What can I do to ensure that I do not fall victim to such a scenario? Surprisingly, a very few basic steps could have prevented this attack from causing the irrevocable damage that it did. I am categorizing these in two different sections for the sake of simplicity. We will start off with controls which could have been deployed for the cloud. The first such control is enabling multi-factor authentication. Having a second factor during authentication ensures that stolen credentials cannot be misused without compromising the second factor as well, which usually needs physical access and thwarts the remote attackers. OTPs, transaction passwords, which are sent on mobiles or emails, have become a common practice for critical applications like internet banking. Use of a second factor might have prevented the attacker from gaining access to the EC2 console in the first place in case of the CodeSpaces incident. Amazon has recently implemented multi-factor authentication, as can be seen from the screenshot. The next control is enabling identity and access management, or IAM, which is a feature present with popular service providers like Amazon and Rackspace. Using properly defined IAM roles can help in providing need-based access thus minimizing the damage if one set of credentials or asset gets compromised. Amazon AWS allows creating user groups and roles with access permissions as well as allowed actions for various users. As you can see on your screen, you are allowed to create different users, different groups, assign permissions to them as well as roles to different users and groups. All of this facilitates better and more granular user management. And best of all, it's free. So you get better security at no additional cost. So next time when you are creating an asset for yourself, it's better to create different groups, create policies for the groups, assign users to your groups, grant permissions according to the user's level, and restrict access to only content which needs to be accessed. That is, give need-based access to the users. The third control is enabling and configuring a firewall. Although the control seems very obvious, its importance is double. Cloud, which are interlinked and have access to each other. Unlike a regular hosting scenario where you only try to prevent attacks happening from the outside world on your infrastructure, in a cloud-based environment, all the assets are interlinked with each other. This makes it imperative that you have firewall rules defined for the outside world as well as for your internal network. An open or weak firewall policy can lead to serious repercussions in case of the assets getting compromised. It is therefore imperative that proper access control rules be defined between linked assets and the rules be kept updated based on current use cases. Amazon allows this with the help of security groups. The next section is a look at generic practices which can help in safeguarding our assets. First and most obvious thing to take care of is the backup. Data redundancy is important irrespective of whether we use traditional hosting or cloud-based hosting. Creating offsite backups, ensuring regular backup, not giving delete rights on the backup are some of the common things which ensure that in case of an incident, the data is at least safe. In cloud hosting, the same rules apply that apply to traditional hosting. However, the challenge is with creating a backup. In traditional methods, we take up backups off-site. However, in case of cloud, the backup is not separated physically but is actually present in the same location. Also, traditional methods like a tape backup are not possible in cloud-based scenarios. Creating a data backup at another service provider on the cloud or at a physical server in-house are better alternatives than creating a backup with the same provider as the production and backup instances end up being a part of the same control panel itself. This kind of approach may have prevented CodeSpaces from going out of business. In case of CodeSpaces, the attacker was able to delete the production data as well as the backup data from the console itself, which means all the data including the backup was present in the same cloud. The next is taking care of system security. In any kind of hosting service, be it cloud or traditional, the provider is not responsible for the safety of the operating system or the applications which are hosted or running on the application system. Safeguarding content on the hosted machine is always the responsibility of the owner of the machine and not the provider. Keeping this in mind, it becomes imperative that we perform security assessment of our assets, safeguard them with antiviruses, and keep the patches up to date. Securing the asset belongs to the owner himself. In addition to simple things like assessment of your applications and applying patches, other services need to be taken care of as well. For example, taking a cloud-based WAF in front of your application will ensure that the application is safeguarded from web-based attacks. A web-based attack itself may be used to compromise your machine and thus delete content from your assets. Now, in spite of having all preventive measures in place, there is always a possibility of an attacker bypassing controls and causing an incident. This highlights the need for an incident response plan which can help in minimizing damage and recovering from the incident. A lack of an incident response plan can sometimes lead to increasing the damage instead. Planning for incidents, creating an escalation matrix, a call tree, a list of do's and don'ts go a long way in helping to avoid careless disasters during an incident. For example, in case of the code spaces incident, the attacker started randomly deleting the EBS volumes when they found out that code spaces was trying to delete the backdoor logins created by them. Maybe contacting AWS and disabling or restricting the entire console may have helped overcome this incident without any serious damage. In this case, the Codespaces team was probably not prepared for such an incident. As soon as they realized that someone had gained access to their console via some username and password, they attempted to get back control of their console by changing the username and password. This is a very instinctive reaction. However, as we have seen, this can have very negative results. Instead of this, had Codespaces had the presence of mind to not avoid this disaster completely. A famous adage goes as follows: change is the only constant. This applies to security as well. Security is not a one-time activity, but an ongoing process. We must keep reviewing our security controls from time to time and update them as and when required. It's a cyclic process where we implement our changes, review the changes, and update them again as and when required. Never-ending process which helps us in ensuring the safety of our assets. The preventive measures which we just discussed are based on controls and practices which are already well known. The Codespaces incident simply reinforces the need for implementing these control measures. It also highlights one very important fact, and that is that security works on a shared responsibility model. For example, in a cloud-based environment, the physical security has to be taken care of by the service provider, ensuring that the physical premises are off limits to strangers or outsiders, ensuring that there is a physical network device control in place is the job of the provider himself. However, maintaining the asset security still is the responsibility of the consumer. Ensuring that proper assessments are done, ensuring that a WAF is in place, ensuring that the firewall has been enabled with updated rules is still the responsibility of the consumer. Unless we adopt this approach of shared responsibility, we will always have loopholes in our security which attackers will be able to exploit. One of the primary reasons that the cloud is so lucrative is the flexibility that it offers. However, this same flexibility can turn out to be dangerous because consumers take this flexibility for granted and assume that the flexibility by default makes them secure. However, this is not the case. In case of a shared responsibility model, part of your security belongs to the provider. However, a part of the security still is the responsibility of the consumer himself. With this, we have come to the end of today's session. Thank you for your participation. We hope this session was informative and useful for all of you. We'll be glad to take any questions that you may have. Okay, the first question that we have is, can we do assessments on cloud service providers? The answer is yes. You can do security assessments of the assets that you have on a cloud. The only prerequisite here is that you need to take permission of your provider before you start the assessment. The permission is a mere formality though. It ensures that the provider knows that you are going to try out activities on your asset and it doesn't trigger off false alarms. This is no different from conducting an assessment on a traditional hosting provider. The next question is Amazon the only company which dealt with such an incident, or are there some other companies as well? Well, the first thing that I would like to clarify here is, although the incident happened on assets which were hosted on the Amazon cloud, Amazon was not really involved in the incident. They just happened to be the service provider. To answer the second part of your question, these incidents are a fairly regular occurrence in the cloud, or rather in the internet. Other service providers like Rackspace too have had to deal with such incidents on their customers' assets. The next question is, can we enlist some good practices for cloud SIM monitoring? Cloud SIM monitoring is not really much different from regular SIM monitoring. Let's remember that a cloud-based hosting makes a difference in how the hosting is being done, but it doesn't really change the way your data flows through the network or is being perceived by the user. This itself is one of the primary reasons why the cloud is so popular. That said, there are a couple of differences which do happen between the traditional hosting and the cloud hosting. However, as far as SIM monitoring goes, the differences are very nominal. The differences do arise in the case of how or where the monitoring devices which feed data to your SIM are placed. For example, in case of a cloud-based web service, you will need to depend on a cloud-based provider which can give you the web services. Whereas in traditional hosting, you might as well use a hardware-based monitoring device which can feed to your SIM. However, once the implementation has been taken care of, the data which comes to the SIM will still be the same and wouldn't be affected by the monitoring. The other thing that we should ensure in cloud-based monitoring is monitoring for internal flow of traffic. That is, if you have multiple assets on the cloud which are interlinked with each other, how do they talk with each other? What are the rules? And are there any events which are contrary to the rules in place? This might help you in identifying if another user on the same cloud provider has been misusing your assets or is trying to attack you. What all measures have to be taken after the occurrence of such an incident? The countermeasures which we need to take have to be preemptive. However, the post-incident measures are something which vary depending on the incident itself, which is why we had highlighted the need for an incident response plan. However, there are some common things which can be done in case of an incident happening to you. The first and foremost being, we should not lose our cool. It is very easy to go into panic mode as soon as we decide that an attack has happened on one of our assets. And this prompts us to take rash decisions which can harm us. First, we need to carefully assess the situation. Also, if possible, we should get an incident analysis expert on board so that he can give us some quick, useful advice on what to do. We should never try to pull out the plug or do anything which can alert the attacker that his activities have been detected. Most attackers, on being detected, start deleting the data or causing destructive actions in order to remove traces of their attacks. Hence, we should ensure that we do not do anything which can be harmful for us. Once the incident is through and all of your data has either been compromised or the incident has completed without any incident, we need to ensure that we do a thorough assessment of our assets. We look at whether the attacker created any backdoor, whether there are any other vulnerabilities which can be exploited in the future. This can be done with the help of security assessments of our assets. I think these things, once taken care of, in addition to the custom requirements of your incident, should help you in recovering back from the incident. The next question is, can I mention a few concerns which are likely to fall between the cloud service provider and the hirer? I'm assuming the question here is trying to ask, what are the security responsibilities which lie between the provider and the consumer? To answer this question, there is nothing that lies between them. Ideally, when you own an asset, the entire responsibility of securing the asset belongs to you, the asset owner, not the provider, not someone else, but you, the owner himself. When you choose a provider, you have to ensure that the provider that you have chosen can ensure whatever security requirements are needed of him. The reason people choose Amazon and Rackspace over maybe lesser known cloud service providers is that they have a reputation and have proven track record of the physical security that they can provide, in addition to the other factors which help in migrating to the cloud. However, irrespective of what the provider gives you, the responsibility of securing your asset still lies with you. If something goes wrong, or your asset is compromised, or your asset is being misused for another attack, all of this responsibility, end of the day, always lies with the owner. For example, if you have an asset on Amazon which was compromised via some attack and ends up attacking other consumers, you will immediately receive an email from Amazon describing the attack and asking you to either shut down the instance or provide an explanation for what had happened. In case they deem that the incident was accidental or intended, then they would not take action. Otherwise, your asset may be freezed and disbanded. The next question is, I use cloud services, but the system management is with the cloud service provider. Is it safe to do so? When we say system management, in this case, the cloud service providers are usually responsible only for giving you a clean, fresh system at the beginning of your transaction with them. Later on, ensuring that the system is secure is something that we need to do. And we also have control in place to ensure that we are able to make changes to our system. For example, if I take a Windows box on the cloud, I would be given RDP access. It's true that the system does belong to the cloud. However, they are not the ones responsible for securing or interfering with the work that we do on our own system. The next question is, in case we are building the private cloud, then which is the most secure cloud orchestration platform? Please provide your recommendation. Okay, that's a tricky one. I am not really sure if I could recommend one. However, going by what the market says, I've heard that the Amazon private cloud is really strong with some good services that they have in place, which distinguishes them from the rest. The Rackspace Cloud Service is also something that I have heard about. However, I have not really used it so far, so I cannot make a comment on that. But the Amazon Private Cloud Services has had some very good reviews in the recent past. The next question is asking us to refer to some link to read implementing SIM on a cloud-based environment. I can refer you to some of the documents. Maybe what I'll do is we'll add a references section to the end of this presentation, and we'll share this on our Palladium site so that when you download this, you'll be able to get the reference links as per your requirement. Okay, the next question is interesting. We are taking services from a cloud service provider, as the cloud itself is a secure platform to work on. Does the service provider ensure us to adhere security related requirements? Okay. I'm assuming the question here is asking whether or not can we be sure that the cloud service provider adheres to the security requirements that he is supposed to be. Nobody can say for sure. However, when you get into an agreement with one of the cloud service providers, this shared responsibility model kicks into place. If someone is providing hosting services for you, and if you go to the terms and conditions of the clauses that you sign, you would see that the hosting provider is responsible for the physical security of your assets. For example, tomorrow, if there was a break-in which was to happen at Amazon, which results in leakage of data, Amazon would be liable to pay for the damages. I hope this answers the question that you're trying to ask. Is IAM possible on a public cloud offering? Yes, it is possible on a public cloud offering. The IAM screenshots that we had shared were from the Amazon public cloud, or rather the EC2, and not the private cloud. Similarly, Rackspace too has started IAM services which can be availed on their public cloud. And the best part is these services are free of cost. It's as good as creating multiple users and groups for different users, just like you do it within your AD in a local environment. Okay. The next question is, there are certain encryption providers for cloud. Does this help with regards to the cloud? I am sorry, but I am not really sure where this question is pointing to. If you could clarify a bit, this would be helpful. Or where is the encryption being provided, or rather what is the encryption being provided for, because encryption is a very generic thing to do. Okay. The next question is, while securing the server hosting our asset is the responsibility of the consumer himself, what happens if the service provider moves around the asset to another server box without giving adequate lead time to the consumer? Now this is the beauty of the cloud. When they do migrations in the background, it's not something that affects the user on the whole. Remember that when you talk about the cloud, it's like one huge shared space, and within the shared space, you have a virtual machine. This virtual machine can move from one place to another. However, the virtual machine contents do not change based on the location of your virtual machine, which is the reason that any changes you make on a device will not be affected by any physical changes that take place on the Amazon console, unless and until they have a hardware failure which results in all the machines or all the data going out, which is a rare occurrence because they have backup policies in place which ensure that the service never does go down. What is the general feedback on Indian companies offering public and private cloud services? Are they at par with Amazon, Rackspace, etc.? To be very honest with you, I have not come across many cloud-based providers in the Indian market scenario who can compete with Amazon or with the rack space. They do tend to occur some lucrative price discounts. However, I think the general tendency is, since everyone knows about Amazon and the security standards that they deploy, people still opt for Amazon or Rackspace as opposed to a localized cloud vendor. This, I think, would be true of not just the Indian market, but the global market as well. However, this is purely based on my views or whatever reviews I have had about the industry. Okay, could we please share the critical points which we need to consider while working with multiple cloud providers? Okay, that's an interesting question. When we do work with multiple cloud providers, or even with a single cloud provider, what we do need to remember is this is not really much different from a traditional hosting provider. The point that we tried to highlight during the session itself was that the mistakes which cost code spaces, their data, and the business were something which they could have avoided. The security measures which we discussed are things which people need to take care of, irrespective of whether your provider is based on the cloud or whether it's a traditional hosting provider. Coming to your question, if you're dealing with multiple cloud providers, you still need to take care of the same things which you would need to take care of as discussed earlier. The first and foremost is securing your assets by ensuring that you have proper backup mechanism so that in case of an incident, you can always recover your data. This backup should be in a different cloud provider or should be taken off-site by downloading it to an on-premise location or a different location so that the backup doesn't get deleted along with your original data. The next is ensuring proper firewall rules so that access to your data is limited. Access control can also be put in place with the help of IAMs. So IAMs, firewalls, proper backup mechanisms, and user groups, in addition to multi-factor authentication, can help you in safeguarding your assets irrespective of whether they are on the cloud or not. When utilizing services from multiple providers, the firewall part becomes even more important because you are linking your assets on different clouds with each other, which means that a compromise on one of the cloud servers could also affect your assets on another provider's cloud. So the stronger your rules and access control, the better your chances of securing your assets. The next question is, how good are the firewall IPS options provided by Amazon and other major providers? This is not with respect to the hosted operating system, but rather the whole security group that you have created. Well, the firewall groups are as secure as you make them out to be. What I mean to say here is, these rules are defined by us, as in the people who create the security groups, who create the firewall rules. The stronger the rules, the better the implementation. The offering that the provider gives to us is just a facility to write the rules. This is not affected by the service provider himself, but rather the kind of rules that we write. I hope I was able to answer your question. Okay. What will be the attack vectors for cloud computing? The attack vectors for cloud computing will be the same as the regular attack vectors. Remember that cloud hosting only differs from a hosting perspective. However, if we are talking about an attacker perspective, all I see is a web application hosted or an SMTP server running on some IP address on the internet. It doesn't really matter to me whether it's on the cloud, whether it's your on-premise location, or whether it's in a database hosting server somewhere on site. What does make a difference is different users on the cloud itself, which is similar to what happens in traditional hosting. So in a cloud-based environment, you can have attacks coming in from the internet, which is your regular attack vectors. And you can also have attacks coming in from the local LAN because your asset is in the same cloud as other people's asset. However, ensuring you have proper firewall rules or disabling private IP-based communication completely can help in preventing all the internal or the private attacks. Okay, the next question is, does Palladium have ready-to-offer services for cloud-based SIEMs? Okay. When we say cloud-based SIEMs, like I had mentioned, it doesn't really differ much when the data comes from. So yes, we do have the SIEM solution, provided you have the networking devices in place which can feed us the data. So the SIM solutions would help you in the monitoring part, so our monitoring team can take care of those aspects, but the devices would still have to be deployed by you, that is the owner. The next question is, can we use the same set of checks and procedures for cloud computing as we use on web-based applications? The answer is yes. As far as a web application is concerned, it doesn't make a difference whether the hosting is on the cloud or is on a physical server. The checks that you do for the security assessment of a web application remain the same. What are the best practices to encrypt the cloud data? Also, does cloud encryption single-handedly protect data? Okay. The best practices for this encryption would be the same as our regular encryption. So when we talk about data encryption, it's primarily the information present in our database. So we need to ensure that our databases follow the standard best practices that you have for any database, regardless of where it is located. As for the encryption, if we use the proper encryption algorithms, they would ensure that any data which is compromised does not get broken into easily by the attackers. Regarding whether cloud encryption single-handedly protects data, I am not really sure if the term here is right. There's no such thing as a cloud encryption. It's really encrypting the data, which again doesn't have much to do with the cloud itself. Okay. How are AWS and Rackspace bound legally since they host their servers abroad? Is the consumer bound by the laws of the land where the data center is located? Okay. I'm not really very thorough with the exact rules and laws which apply here. What I do know in the generic sense is there is some level of liability which does apply to the cloud service provider, and like you have mentioned, it is bound by the laws of the land. But maybe taking a closer look at the terms and conditions of the rules might give you a better idea of what exactly does apply in this scenario. Okay, the next question is a concern regarding latency. As not all cloud service providers reside in hotspots, instead most of them are in either the US or the European region. How can latency be reduced without impacting the cost? I believe this is a problem that they are trying to address generally. For example, they have new cloud services. Amazon has started the cloud services in the Singapore region as well. So maybe they are slowly migrating or setting up bases in hotspots to ensure that latency is taken care of. The next question is, most consumers are worried about their data in transit from the premises to the cloud. How well can this be secured? Well, I'm assuming we are talking about transferring data from an on-premise or from one provider to a different provider on the cloud. In this case, the measures that you need to take are the same as that you need to deploy whenever data transfer happens on the cloud or on the internet itself. So you need to ensure that you are using proper encrypted protocols rather than clear text-based protocols. You also need to ensure that you have proper authentication in place so that a person cannot try and get into your account and start stealing data before they start the transmission itself. Proper authentication, access control, and using secure channels of communication should be able to ensure that you have a fairly safe transit from your premises to the cloud. Okay, the next question is a pretty relevant one. If my data is in the cloud, my security is also in the cloud, and my backup is in the cloud, what do I control? That's a very interesting question, or rather an interesting way to put it. It's true that all your data and the controls belong to the cloud, but what you do control are the rules that you implement itself. So let's for a moment try to forget that we're talking about the cloud. Let's think of a server, a physical server which is located somewhere out there in the region. And you have ensured physical security for the server so that no one can come and access the server or steal data directly. Now, what is it that you could do next to safeguard this server out there in the middle of nowhere? You would probably ensure that you have proper access rules on the server so that anyone who does connect to it remotely does not get unauthorized access. You would also ensure that you have some sort of filters in terms of, or detecting measures in terms of your WAFs or your IDS IPSs so that you can filter out malicious content. Now, once you have taken care of these aspects, you can be pretty sure that this server is secure from most attacks out there. Now, you replace this server with the cloud. This server, which was in the middle of nowhere, is your cloud. So it's very true that you do not have your data with you. It's very true that all your security measures are still on the cloud. But we are the ones who do ensure that the measures are in place. Regarding the backup, that's an excellent question. But in the case of backup, let's try to think of why do we need a backup in the first place, or what purpose does it serve? The entire reasoning behind having a backup is data redundancy. In case you lose data or your data gets corrupted for some reason, you should be able to bring your services back up. Let's forget about security incidents. Let's think of what happens if your cloud service provider has an outage for the next 5 hours. Does it mean that your data is lost? You wouldn't want that, right? So what's the next best course of action that you can take? You can transmit all your data to a different cloud provider and keep it as a backup. Or maybe you can take your data and download it to your on-site location and keep it as a backup. Off-site backups are the thumb rule in case of traditional hosting providers. It's no different in case of cloud, except that taking a tape backup for off-site locations is not possible in the cloud environment, which is why we would ideally want to store the data in a different location. I hope these answer your questions. Okay, the next question is related to Sophos and its working. And we have been asked whether it's a global tool which is being used by the cloud service providers. Sophos is just an organization that works in the anti-malware domain or in the protection domain, which is very similar to a McAfee or a Symantec out there. The exact workings, as far as we go to, would be completely a signature-based working. Cloud service providers use Sophos as well as other vendors in order to get the latest threats which are applicable to their environments or the internet in general. That's the generic idea behind this working. It is not a generic tool or something which has to be used by everyone. It is just one of the anti-malware vendors of the that we have. Okay. With that, I think we have come to the end of our question and answer sessions. I would like to thank all of you once again for your participation. You can find this webinar as well as all others on our Palladian Labs website. We look forward to having you again with us. Thank you once again. Have a good day.